Hey everyone! Today, we're talking about one of the biggest and wildest uprisings in the Middle Ages, the Peasants Revolt of 1381. This wasn't just a small protest, it was a full-on rebellion that shook England. It was led by people like Wat Tyler and John Ball, and they had some big demands. They wanted to get rid of unfair taxes, earn better wages, take wealth away from the church, and most importantly, end serfdom so peasants wouldn't be tied to the land anymore. The rebellion started in southeast England and quickly spread to London. The rebels were angry and wanted change, but they weren't trying to remove King Richard II. In fact, they thought he would help them against corrupt officials. At first, Richard pretended to listen to their demands, but once he had control of the situation, he turned against them. The revolt lasted only about 4 weeks before it was crushed. Many rebel leaders were executed, and any hope of immediate change was gone. However, the government did get rid of the poll tax, and over time, more peasants gained their freedom by buying their way out of serfdom. So, why did this happen? The truth is, the revolt had been building up for years. England had been struggling ever since the Black Death in 1348, which killed nearly half the population. This meant there weren't enough workers, so peasants should have been able to ask for better wages. But the wealthy landowners didn't want that, so they passed laws to keep wages low and force workers to stay put. Many landlords even tried to turn free laborers back into serfs just to save money. The peasants were getting more and more frustrated. Then came the breaking point, a new poll tax. This was the third one in a few years, and it made everyone over 15 pay the same amount, no matter how rich or poor they were. Even worse, the tax was 3 times higher than before. England had been fighting France for a long time, and the government needed money for the war. But the people had had enough. Tax collectors were met with anger, and soon, violence broke out. It started with attacks on tax officials and the burning of government records. Rebels rode through towns, destroying manor houses and freeing prisoners. This wasn't just an out-of-control riot. Many of the rebels were well-off farmers, local leaders, and even priests who were tired of corruption. One of the loudest voices was John Ball, a preacher who had been jailed several times for his radical ideas. He questioned why rich people lived in luxury while poor people barely survived. His fiery speeches only made the rebellion grow stronger. By June 11th, thousands of rebels were marching toward London. Some say there were over 60,000 of them, and with the king's army away in Scotland, the capital was defenseless. But even with all the chaos, the rebels weren't trying to take Richard II off the throne. They thought he was on their side and swore loyalty to him. Their real fight was against the unfair system that kept them poor while the rich got richer. Unfortunately, they were about to learn that trusting the king was a huge mistake. And the rebels stormed London, destroying property, freeing prisoners, and even killing the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now things were about to take a dramatic and deadly turn. On June 15th, King Richard II, just 14 years old, met the rebel leaders at Smithfield, outside London. It seemed like another chance to negotiate, but Richard had no plans to give in. He had soldiers waiting nearby, ready to take control if things got out of hand. The rebels' demands were bold. They wanted to end serfdom, raise wages, have more say in local government, and take away power from corrupt lords and the church. Some of these ideas, like ending serfdom, were already happening in parts of England. But others, like redistributing the church's wealth, were direct challenges to some of the most powerful people in the country. The peasants weren't just fighting for survival, they wanted a fairer system. At Smithfield, the atmosphere was tense. Wat Tyler, the leader of the revolt, approached the king. Some say he was disrespectful, even spitting water at Richard's feet. That was all the excuse the authorities needed. William Walworth, the mayor of London, suddenly attacked Tyler, stabbing him. As Tyler fell, chaos broke out. The rebels, furious, looked ready to fight. Then, Richard did something unexpected. Instead of running or ordering his soldiers to attack, He rode forward and shouted to the crowd. He told them he was their rightful leader and promised to listen to them. Confused and without their leader, many of the rebels hesitated. They believed the king and stood down. The revolt was crumbling. But Richard had been lying. As soon as the rebels backed off, he ordered mass arrests. Around 150 of them were executed, many hanged in public as a warning. So many were killed that new gallows had to be built. Wat Tyler's severed head was put on display on London Bridge to send a message. This is what happens when you rise up against the king. The rebellion was over. Some smaller uprisings popped up in other parts of England, but they were quickly crushed. And Richard made it clear that he had no sympathy for the peasants, telling them, "Villains ye are, and villains ye shall remain." At first, it seemed like nothing had changed. The ruling class stayed in power, and the rebellion was crushed. But in reality, the revolt had shaken England. The hated poll tax was gone, wage limits weren't enforced as strictly, and serfdom slowly faded away as more peasants bought their freedom. The revolt had failed in the moment, but it had sent a message. The people weren't powerless, and those in charge knew they had to be careful. So, was the revolt a success? Not really. Tyler was dead, and Richard went back on his word. But the fear it created in England's rulers was real. The lower classes had shown they wouldn't suffer forever, and that idea wasn't going away.